What if your fondest childhood memories weren't memories at all, but something far darker lurking beneath the surface? On Nightmare Narratives, we unravel a tale of nostalgia, mystery, and chilling revelations that may make you question everything you thought you knew. It began innocently enough on a forgotten corner of a nostalgia forum. Someone asked, "Does anyone remember a kids' show called Candle Cove?" The thread quickly lit up with responses. People shared fragmented memories of marionette pirates, eerie music, and a protagonist named Janice. Yet the details were inconsistent. A pirate ship with a grotesque, smiling face called the Laughingstock, and a villain named the Skin Taker with an unsettlingly skeletal appearance. As the thread grew, the memories darkened. Users recalled scenes of screaming puppets, jarring transitions between poorly made props, and a haunting phrase, "You have to go inside." The eeriest post came from someone who claimed their mother had once told them, "You never watched a show called Candle Cove. You just stared at static for 30 minutes." The thread quickly spiraled into a collaborative investigation. People began reconstructing episodes based on shared fragments of memory. Someone recalled an episode where Pirate Percy warned Janice not to look into the light of the Laughingstock's lantern. They claimed the scene ended with the ship's lantern glowing brighter and brighter until the screen cut to static. Another user described an episode that revolved around a game the puppets played called Find the Soul. The rules were never explained, but the game seemed to involve Janice hiding in increasingly terrifying places, under the floorboards, behind a mirror, and finally, inside a coffin. She kept whispering, "Don't let them find me," the user wrote. But the coffin started shaking like someone was inside, pounding to get out. The thread became a collective experiment in memory. More users shared fragments of what they remembered, and the puzzle pieces began to form an unsettling picture. One participant recalled how episodes would often end abruptly, sometimes mid-sentence or during moments of tension. It felt like the show wanted to leave you unsettled, they said, like it thrived on the unease it created. One of the most chilling recollections involved a character named the Whisper. According to multiple users, the Whisper was a shadowy figure who rarely spoke, but when he did, his words were nearly inaudible, like a breeze brushing against the microphone. "I don't remember what he said," one user admitted, "but I remember the feeling. It was like he wasn't talking to the characters. He was talking to me." Another user added to this, claiming that the Whisper often appeared in the background, barely noticeable. Once you saw him, you couldn't unsee him. He was always there, just out of focus, watching. As the thread gained traction, users began sharing eerie dreams and personal experiences tied to the show. A recurring theme involved dark corridors or endless hallways. One user described a dream in which they walked through a tunnel filled with mirrors. "Each mirror showed me something different," they wrote. "One showed me as a child, watching Candle Cove on a static-filled screen. Another showed the Skin Taker standing behind me, his jaw grinding as if he were trying to speak." A particularly haunting post described a dream involving the Laughingstock. "I was on the ship, but it wasn't moving. The sea was still, and everything was silent except for the creaking of the wood. Then, the ship's face turned toward me, and its grin grew wider and wider. It whispered, 'You've always been here.' I woke up screaming." As the thread grew, users began reporting unusual occurrences in their daily lives. TVs turning on by themselves, faint music echoing in empty rooms, and shadowy figures appearing at the edges of their vision became common complaints. One chilling post described a user who woke up at 3 a.m. to find their television playing static. "I swear," they wrote, "I could hear whispers beneath the static, calling my name. Another user claimed they found an old drawing they had made as a child, depicting the Laughingstock. "I don't even remember drawing this," they wrote. "But it's there, in my handwriting. The Laughingstock is my friend." One user, who had remained a skeptic, finally posted their own unsettling experience. "I was reading this thread late at night," they wrote, "when I heard my child laughing in the other room. When I went to check, she was asleep, but the TV in her room was on, showing nothing but static." As the discussion deepened, so did the theories. Some suggested that Candle Cove was a psychological experiment designed to test the effects of subliminal messages on children. Others believed it was a rogue production created by someone with a twisted sense of creativity. A darker theory proposed that the show wasn't made by humans at all. "What if it was something else?" one user asked. "Something that used the show as a way to reach us?" One of the most unsettling theories revolved around the idea that Candle Cove was never meant to be remembered. "Maybe," one user speculated, "the show was supposed to erase itself from our minds after we watched it, but something went wrong. We weren't supposed to remember." The turning point came when a user claimed to have found a VHS tape labeled Candle Cove Pilot. They described the footage as grainy, almost unwatchable, but still deeply unsettling. "The puppets didn't move like normal puppets," they wrote. "Their movements were too smooth, almost like they were alive." They uploaded a short clip from the tape, which showed Janice walking through a forest. The trees seemed to move as she passed, bending toward her as if they were watching. In the distance, the Laughingstock loomed, its grin growing wider with each step Janice took. Within hours, the uploader's account was deleted. Those who had seen the clip reported experiencing nausea, dizziness, and an overwhelming sense of dread. "I felt like I wasn't alone in the room," one user wrote, "like something was watching me." The thread reached its climax when a user named The Last Watcher claimed to have worked on the production of Candle Cove. "It wasn't just a show," they wrote. "It was a doorway. The puppets. They weren't puppets. They were vessels." Before they could elaborate, their account was deleted, but their final message remained. "If you remember Candle Cove, it remembers you too. Don't let it in." The mystery of Candle Cove remains unresolved, but its impact is undeniable. The show, whether real or imagined, has left a legacy of fear, curiosity, and unanswered questions. Was it a psychological experiment? A rogue production? Or something far more sinister? As one user chillingly put it, "Maybe Candle Cove wasn't made for us to watch. Maybe it was watching us." What do you think really happened on Candle Cove? Drop your theories in the comments. Your take might unravel the mystery. Years after Candle Cove had faded into obscurity, Adrian inherited his estranged mother's house, a sprawling yet decayed New England estate surrounded by dense woods and shadowed by years of neglect. The house had always felt like a relic from another time, its creaking floorboards and peeling wallpaper exuding an oppressive air of abandonment. Adrian hadn't set foot in the place since he was a child, and his memories of those days felt blurry, as if hidden behind a veil he couldn't lift. While clearing out the basement, Adrian stumbled upon something peculiar, a locked door at the far end of the room. Its existence puzzled him. He had spent countless hours in this basement as a child, and was sure no such door had been there before. The door was heavy and rusted, with strange carvings around its frame, symbols that looked like they belonged to another era or culture entirely. After forcing it open with a crowbar, he found himself staring into a small claustrophobic room filled with shelves of marionettes. The marionettes were unlike anything Adrian had ever seen before. Dust coated their surfaces, but their eyes gleamed unnaturally in the dim light. Some looked like crude imitations of human figures, while others were grotesque caricatures with exaggerated features. Among them was a grotesque skeleton puppet with glass eyes and a tattered hat, the spitting image of the skin taker from Candle Cove. Adrian's unease grew as he examined the puppets. They felt wrong, unnaturally cold to the touch and heavier than they should have been. One puppet, resembling Pirate Percy, seemed to have claw marks on its wooden body. Another, a crude representation of Janice, had a cracked face and a tear-streaked expression, as though it had been crying. A strange odor hung in the air, a mix of mildew and something metallic, like blood that had long since dried. In the corner of the room, Adrian found a small, battered trunk with the words, "Do not open," scrawled across the top in faded red paint. Against his better judgment, he pried it open. Inside were VHS tapes, each labeled with titles such as Candle Cove, Episode 4, and Season 3 Pilot. Beneath the tapes lay a notebook filled with sketches of the Laughingstock, the Skin Taker, and other characters from the show. The handwriting on the pages was frantic, almost illegible, and the words, "It's watching," were repeated over and over. Despite his unease, Adrian decided to play one of the tapes. He dusted off an old VHS player he had found among the clutter and inserted the tape. At first, the screen showed only static, but then the images began to form. The footage was grainy and distorted, as if it were fighting against time itself to be seen. The show's haunting theme song played faintly in the background, warped and off-key. The episode featured Janice standing alone in a darkened forest. The Laughingstock loomed in the background, its face grinning grotesquely as its lantern flickered. Janice appeared terrified, clutching a small object, a key perhaps, as the puppets around her began to chant, "Go inside, go inside." The screen abruptly cut to static, but Adrian's eyes remained glued to the screen. He rewound the tape, hoping to understand what he had just seen. As he rewound the footage, he noticed something horrifying. Hidden between the frames were flashes of images that had no place in a children's show. A child's hand reaching out of a dark void, a wooden door shaking violently, a pair of eyes, unblinking and human, staring directly at the camera. Adrian stopped the tape and ejected it, his heart pounding. But he couldn't stop himself from playing another. This one was labeled Season 3 Pilot. The footage began with the Laughingstock floating on a black sea, its lantern swinging wildly in a non-existent wind. The puppets stood motionless on the deck, their strings taut. Janice was nowhere to be seen. The scene was silent, except for the sound of waves crashing. Waves that sounded unnervingly human, like screams muffled beneath water. The camera zoomed in on the Laughingstock's face, and its mouth began to move, though no sound came out. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, until Adrian could swear he heard whispers, faint, disjointed, and coming from somewhere behind him. He turned around, but the room was empty. When he looked back at the screen, the Laughingstock's face was pressed against the camera, its jagged smile filling the frame. Adrian ripped the tape out of the player and threw it across the room. From that night on, Adrian's life began to unravel. He started hearing whispers in the house, faint and unintelligible at first, but growing clearer with each passing day. They seemed to emanate from the basement, even when the door was locked. At night, he would hear footsteps pacing back and forth, stopping just outside his bedroom door. When he mustered the courage to investigate, he found nothing but silence and darkness. One morning, Adrian woke to find the skin taker puppet sitting at the foot of his bed. He was certain he had left it in the basement, Its glassy eyes seemed to glint in the early morning light, and its jaw was slightly ajar, as if it had been about to speak. Determined to understand what was happening, Adrian returned to the basement with a flashlight. The air felt heavier as he descended the creaking stairs, and the whispers grew louder with each step. When he reached the locked room, he found the marionettes arranged differently. They were all facing the door, their eyes seemingly fixed on him. Adrian's discovery coincided with a string of disappearances in the town. Over the past 6 months, 4 children had vanished without a trace, leaving behind no evidence except eerie whispers among the townsfolk about a ship and a cave. The local authorities were baffled, and the community was gripped by fear. Some of the older residents whispered that the disappearances reminded them of a similar string of incidents decades ago, around the time when Candle Cove supposedly aired. Desperate for answers, Adrian began visiting the local library, poring over old newspapers and town records. He found vague reports of children claiming to have seen a smiling ship before they vanished. One article mentioned a child's sketchbook found in the woods, its pages filled with crude drawings of a ship with a grinning face, surrounded by shadowy figures. As Adrian dug deeper, he stumbled upon a forgotten legend tied to the area. Locals spoke of a ship called the Laughingstock that had allegedly wrecked off the coast centuries ago. According to the legend, the ship was cursed, its crew doomed to wander between worlds, luring the innocent into the shadows. The whispers in the house grew more insistent, calling Adrian back to the basement night after night. One evening, as he sat in his living room, he heard the unmistakable sound of the VHS player starting up on its own. The screen showed static at first, but then a familiar voice broke through. "Come inside, Adrian." Unable to resist, he descended into the basement once more. This time, the locked door was open, and the marionettes were gone. In their place was a small, tattered book with the words "Emerson's Journal" scrawled on the cover. Adrian's hands trembled as he opened it. The journal was filled with frantic entries written by his late brother, Emerson, who had worked briefly on Candle Cove as a set designer. The entries spoke of the Signal, a malevolent force that the puppets and tapes were mere conduits for. Emerson described nights spent editing the show, hearing whispers that seemed to come from the footage itself. "The Laughingstock isn't just a ship," he had written. "It's a doorway. The puppets. They aren't puppets. They're prisoners." Adrian dropped the journal and fled the basement. The last entry he had read was burned into his mind. "They're coming. They need another story to feed." What would you do if you were Adrian? Leave a comment below with your thoughts and theories. We'd love to hear your take on this chilling tale. Adrian couldn't escape the whispers. They had woven themselves into his life, subtle at first, but now all-encompassing. Even outside the house, he felt their pull, soft murmurs that seemed to come from nowhere, yet felt as though they were coming from inside his own mind. He had fled to a nearby motel, desperate for clarity, but the distance only seemed to strengthen the bond. The house, the tapes, the puppets, they were all part of something far larger than he could comprehend. One night, while trying to sleep in the motel, Adrian woke to a sudden noise, the sound of static. It was faint at first, but as he sat up, it grew louder. He turned to the old television in the corner, which had turned itself on. The screen flickered, showing nothing but static, yet Adrian could see shapes within the chaos. They weren't clear, but they were there, shifting, watching. Then, the screen cleared for a moment, revealing the Laughingstock. Its face filled the screen, its jagged grin wider than ever. The lantern swung back and forth, casting eerie shadows, and its voice, low and distorted, spoke directly to Adrian. "You cannot leave. Come inside." Before Adrian could react, the screen went dark, and the motel room was silent once more. He sat frozen, the weight of the message pressing on his chest. The Laughingstock's words echoed in his mind, louder than the whispers ever had. He knew he couldn't avoid it any longer. He had to go back. When Adrian returned to the house, it was as if the building had been waiting for him. The air felt heavier, the walls seemed closer, and the silence was deafening. The whispers began again the moment he stepped inside, louder and more insistent than ever. They guided him back to the basement, where the second door still stood ajar, its faint glow illuminating the marionettes that now hung from the ceiling like spectators. As Adrian entered the hidden room, he noticed changes. The sewing machine was no longer running, but the cloak it had been crafting was now draped over a chair. Its surface shimmered faintly as if alive. The pile of children's shoes and clothing in the corner had grown larger, though Adrian couldn't fathom how. He approached the cloak, feeling an almost magnetic pull toward it, but stopped short when he saw something else. A mirror, cracked and tarnished, standing against the far wall. The mirror reflected not just Adrian, but the entire room, and something more. In its surface, he could see the Laughingstock, grinning as always, its lantern swinging. The puppets stood behind it, their glass eyes fixed on Adrian through the reflection. But when he turned to look behind him, the room was empty. "You've come far," a voice whispered. It wasn't a voice Adrian recognized, but it was deep and resonant, filling the room as though it emanated from the walls themselves. "But there's still more to see." Adrian turned back to the journal he had discovered earlier, flipping through its pages with trembling hands. Each entry grew more frantic, more unhinged, as Emerson documented his descent into madness. July 25th. I've seen the doorway. It's not just here, it's everywhere. The Laughingstock moves through it, reaching into our world. The stories keep it alive. If we stop telling them, it will take us instead. August 1st. The skin taker isn't just a puppet. None of them are. They're messengers, servants of the thing behind the signal. It doesn't care about the stories. It cares about the fear. The stories are just a way to harvest it. August 10th. I've tried to leave, but it won't let me. The tapes won't burn. The puppets won't break. It wants me to finish the story. It needs an ending. Adrian felt a chill run down his spine as he read the final entry, written in a shaky hand that seemed barely capable of holding a pen. August 15th. It's not just in the house anymore. It's in me. I see it when I close my eyes. I hear it in the static. I feel it in the dark. If you're reading this, it's already too late. Adrian realized that the tapes were only part of the puzzle. The true danger lay in the signal itself, an ancient force that had found a way to infiltrate the modern world. Through television, radio, and even memory, it spread like a virus, infecting those who came into contact with it. The Laughingstock and its crew were merely its avatars, embodiments of its will. The signal didn't just feed on fear, it thrived on it, growing stronger with each retelling of its story. The more people remembered Candle Cove, the more powerful it became. Adrian understood now why the show had been so ephemeral, appearing and disappearing without a trace. It wasn't meant to be permanent. It was a seed, planted in the minds of its viewers, waiting to bloom. Adrian knew he had to destroy the tapes, the puppets, and the room itself, but every attempt was thwarted. The tapes wouldn't burn. The puppets reappeared no matter how many times he threw them out. The second door, once opened, could not be closed. Desperate, Adrian returned to the hidden room one last time. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices urging him forward. The mirror glowed faintly, its surface rippling like water. Adrian approached it, his reflection distorting as he drew closer. He felt a hand on his shoulder, cold, skeletal, but when he turned, no one was there. The mirror began to pull him in, its surface stretching like a liquid membrane. Adrian fought against it, but the force was too strong. As he was drawn inside, he saw flashes of Candle Cove, Janice crying, the skin-taker's jaw grinding, the Laughingstock's lantern swinging, and then darkness. Adrian was never seen again. The house was found empty, its basement sealed with heavy chains. Local authorities refused to investigate further after a series of strange incidents involving officers who entered the house. One reportedly quit the force, claiming he had seen his own reflection in the mirror, grinning back at him with the Laughingstock's jagged smile. The tapes were confiscated, but later went missing from evidence storage. Rumors persist that they have resurfaced online, shared among thrill seekers and conspiracy theorists. Each viewing seems to draw more people into the story, and with every retelling, the signal grows stronger. The Laughingstock waits, its lantern swinging in the darkness, ready for the next chapter to begin. If you've made it this far, don't leave without subscribing to Nightmare Narratives and ringing the bell. You won't want to miss the next bone-chilling story that comes your way.